Hello and welcome. Power whispers to you in the quiet moments. It calls from dusty tomes stacked in forgotten towers, from the crackle of energy between your fingertips, from the very fabric of reality that bends ever so slightly when you concentrate. You hear stories of wizards who reshape mountains with a word, who walk between worlds as easily as stepping through doorways, who hold the secrets of life and death in their minds. And you want it. That desire burns in your chest like a flame that never dims, never satisfies, only grows hungrier with each passing day. But nobody tells you the truth. Nobody warns you about the price written in fine print at the bottom of the contract you sign with your first spell. The tales speak of glory, of legendary archmages whose names echo through history, of power beyond mortal comprehension. They don't speak of what you lose. They don't speak of what you become. Section 1. The Seduction of Power. You remember the beginning, don't you? The moment when magic first revealed itself to you, when you realized the world contained depths that others couldn't perceive. Perhaps you saw a traveling wizard perform what seemed like miracles in your village square. Perhaps you found a spell scroll in your family's attic, its arcane symbols dancing before your eyes with meaning you shouldn't have understood, but somehow did. Perhaps the gift simply awakened within you one day, unbidden and undeniable, making candles flare with a thought, or causing books to float through the air. That first touch of magic felt like coming home to a place you'd never been, like discovering a sixth sense you didn't know you were missing. The decision to pursue the art seemed inevitable, didn't it? Natural. Right. How could you not follow this path when it called to you so clearly? Your family might have celebrated, proud that their child showed such promise. Or perhaps they mourned, understanding better than you what road you'd chosen. Either way, you were already lost to them. Magic had claimed you, and there would be no turning back. Your apprenticeship began with excitement and wonder. You arrived at your master's tower, your heart racing with anticipation, your mind full of dreams about the spells you'd learn and the power you'd wield. The tower itself might have been modest or grand, cramped or spacious, but to you, it was a temple of knowledge, and you were ready to worship at its altar. Your master greeted you with stern words about discipline and sacrifice, but you barely heard them. You were already imagining yourself casting fireball, summoning creatures from other planes, perhaps even achieving immortality. Young fools never listen to warnings. They think themselves different, special, immune to the fates that befell others. You were no exception. The first lessons seemed simple enough. You learned to read the ancient languages in which spells were written, tongues that hadn't been spoken by living mortals in thousands of years. The words felt strange in your mouth, consonants that didn't exist in common speech. vowels that required you to shape your breath in unnatural ways. Your master insisted you practice these pronunciations for hours each day until your throat ached and your voice grew hoarse. Precision, they would say, is the difference between controlling fire and becoming it. You thought they were being overly cautious. You didn't yet understand that a single mispronounced syllable could tear holes in reality or turn your blood to acid in your veins. You studied the fundamental theories of magic, learning how the weave connects all things, how it responds to will and word and gesture. The weave, maintained by the goddess Mistra and her predecessors, serves as the interface through which raw magic is accessed and channeled by spellcasters. You learned about the schools of magic, each with its own philosophy and approach to bending reality. Evocation promised raw power, the ability to command the elements themselves. Conjuration offered the power to summon and bind creatures from across the plains. Necromancy whispered of power over death itself, of secrets that most dare not touch. Each school had its allure, each its potential for corruption that nobody mentioned in those early days. The cantrips came first, as they always do. Simple tricks, your master called them, nothing more than exercises to teach you control. You learned to create lights that danced in the air, to mend small tears in fabric, to chill water or warm your hands. These tiny spells filled you with disproportionate joy. You were doing magic, actual magic, bending the laws of nature to your will. You practiced constantly, showing off to anyone who would watch, delighting in the amazed expressions of those who possessed no magical talent. You felt special, chosen, superior, but your master watched you with sad eyes, seeing not your triumph, but your doom. They'd trained apprentices before. They knew what came next. The first real spell you learned was probably something from the first level, something considered safe for beginners. Perhaps magic missile, those unerring bolts of force that strike whatever target you choose. Perhaps shield, that invisible barrier that deflects incoming attacks. Perhaps identify, letting you see the magical nature of enchanted objects. Whichever it was, you remember the preparation with perfect clarity. The hours spent copying the spell into your spellbook, each symbol and glyph drawn with painstaking care. The slightest error would render the spell useless at best, dangerous at worst. Your hand cramped from holding the pen so carefully. Your eyes blurred from staring at the intricate patterns, but you persisted. This was your first step toward real power. Then came the memorization. You sat with the spell before you, speaking the words, tracing the gestures, feeling the way the weave responded to your touch. Over and over, hour after hour, day after day, until the spell existed not just on parchment, but in your mind, ready to be shaped into reality. The process was exhausting in ways that physical labor never could be. It wasn't your muscles that ached, but something deeper, something in the core of your being. Based on what we know about how wizards prepare spells, you were reshaping your consciousness to hold patterns that mortal minds weren't naturally designed to contain. The first time you successfully cast that spell, reality bent to your will in a way that went beyond the cantrips. The power that flowed through you was intoxicating, addictive, better than any wine or drug. You felt invincible, godlike, as though you transcended your mortal limitations. The spell worked exactly as it should, producing exactly the effect you intended, and you laughed with pure joy at your accomplishment. Your master nodded approval, but their expression held no joy, only recognition. They'd felt it too, that rush of power, and they knew what it meant. They knew you were hooked, but nobody told you about the cost. Nobody explained that each time you channel magic through your body, it changes you. The changes are subtle at first, too small to notice. Your eyes might start to glow faintly when you concentrate on complex magical formulas. Your hair might begin to float, as though underwater when you're deep in study. Your skin might feel cooler to the touch. Your heartbeat might slow. Your need for sleep might diminish. These changes could imply that magic is fundamentally altering your physical form, rewriting the very essence of what makes you mortal. At first, these seem like advantages, gifts that make you more efficient, more capable. You don't realize you're becoming less human with every spell you cast. The hunger for knowledge grew inside you like a living thing. One spell wasn't enough. You needed 2, then 5, then 10. You needed to understand not just how spells worked, but why, not just to cast magic, but to master it completely. You began spending more time with your books than with people. Conversations with non-wizards became tedious, their concerns trivial, their understanding of the world so limited and shallow. They worried about crops and weather and gossip, while you were learning to reshape reality itself. You didn't mean to grow arrogant, but how could you not? The gap between what you knew and what they could comprehend widened with every passing day. Your relationships began to fray. Friends from before your apprenticeship stopped inviting you to gatherings because you'd spend the whole time distracted, thinking about some magical theorem you'd read that morning. Family members grew hurt when you brushed off their attempts at connection, unable to understand why you'd rather read about extraplanar geometries than attend their celebrations. A romantic partner, if you had one, felt your attention drifting away, felt themselves becoming less important than whatever spell you were currently obsessing over. Some of these people tried to pull you back, to remind you of who you were before magic consumed you. You resented their interference. Couldn't they see how important your studies were? Couldn't they understand that you were working towards something greater than their mundane concerns. Your master watched this transformation with grim familiarity. They'd gone through it themselves, decades or perhaps centuries ago. They'd lost their own friends, their own family, their own humanity piece by piece. They could have warned you more strongly, could have tried to prevent your descent, but they knew it would be futile. You wouldn't have listened. No apprentice ever does. The hunger for magic is stronger than any warning, any plea, any promise of the cost. By the time you understand what you're losing, you're already too deep to turn back. The power is too alluring, the knowledge too precious, the alternative too unbearable. To stop studying magic now would be like asking a fish to stop swimming or a bird to stop flying. It's become part of your nature, woven into the fabric of who you are. The second level of spells opened new horizons and new temptations. You learned to turn invisible to divine the future, to charm others into doing your bidding. The power grew exponentially, and so did the changes in you. Your dreams became strange, filled with visions of places that don't exist in the mortal world, of geometries that shouldn't be possible, of colors that have no names. You woke from these dreams feeling disoriented, as though you'd been somewhere real rather than simply asleep. And perhaps you had been. The boundaries between dreaming and waking, between imagination and reality, began to blur for you. Your master began teaching you about the dangers now, about wizards who'd gone too far and paid terrible prices. They told you about Karsus, the Netherese archmage who tried to steal the power of the goddess Mistral herself, and instead triggered the fall of an entire civilization. In negative 339 Dale reckoning, Karsus cast a spell of his own creation, attempting to claim Mistral's divine power over the weave. For a brief moment, he succeeded, achieving apotheosis and becoming a god. But Mistral, in her final act, sacrificed herself to sever Karsus's connection to the weave, causing all magic to fail. The floating cities of Nethril plummeted from the sky, and Karsus himself turned to stone, his eyes still glowing with the last remnants of divine omniscience as he watched his civilization die. Your master spoke of countless others who delved too deep into forbidden knowledge and emerged changed into something no longer quite human. They warned you about lichdom, about the temptation to seek immortality at any cost. You listened with half your attention, thinking these stories were ancient history, lessons about mistakes you'd never make. You'd be different. You'd be careful. You'd know when to stop. But there is no stopping. That's the secret they can't quite bring themselves to tell you outright. Once you've tasted real power, once you've felt the weave respond to your will and reshape reality according to your desire, you can never go back to being ordinary. The magic has marked you, claimed you, changed you in ways that go deeper than flesh and bone. You are becoming something else, step by step, spell by spell, choice by choice. And the terrifying truth is that even if someone explained this to you clearly, even if they showed you your own future, you would still choose this path. Because the alternative, living a normal life without magic, has become unthinkable. You'd rather be a monster with power than a human without it. The third level of spells brought even greater power and even greater changes. Fireball became yours to command, letting you rain destruction on your enemies. You learned to fly, to breathe underwater, to protect yourself with barriers of pure magical force. Each new spell fed the hunger rather than sating it. You needed more, always more. Your spellbook became your most precious possession, more valuable to you than any treasure, any relationship, any memory of who you used to be. You protected it obsessively, warded it against theft and fire, and water and time itself. To lose your spellbook would be to lose yourself, for you'd poured so much of your identity into those pages that you barely existed outside of them anymore. Your apprenticeship was nearing its end now. You'd learned the fundamentals, mastered the basic levels of magic, proven yourself capable of independent study. Your master prepared to release you into the world, to let you continue your studies alone. This should have been a moment of triumph, of celebration. You'd achieved what so few could manage, becoming a true wizard, a wielder of arcane power. But your master looked at you with something like mourning in their eyes. They saw what you were becoming, what you'd already lost, what you would lose in the years to come. They'd hoped, perhaps foolishly, that you might be different, that you might avoid the pitfalls that had trapped them and countless others. But you were following the same path, making the same choices, surrendering yourself to the same hunger. On your last day of apprenticeship, your master finally told you something honest, something real. The hardest part, they said, isn't learning the magic. It's living with what the magic does to you. It's watching yourself become something you wouldn't have recognized when you started. It's realizing that the power you sought has a price, and you've already paid it, and you can never get back what you've lost. You didn't understand then. You nodded and thanked them for their wisdom. But the words didn't penetrate the armor of ambition you'd built around your heart. You were eager to leave, to begin your own research, to pursue power without restraint or caution. The world waited for you, full of secrets to uncover, spells to learn, knowledge to acquire. You couldn't waste time on philosophical musings about the nature of magic and its cost. There was too much to do, too much to learn, too little time. You left the tower and began your independent life as a wizard. You found or built your own tower, your own sanctuary, your own prison. You gathered books and scrolls and magical components, surrounding yourself with the tools of your art. You established a routine of study and practice, spending 14 or 16 or 18 hours a day immersed in magical research. Sleep became an inconvenience, food a necessity you resented, human contact an interruption. You were productive, brilliant even, making breakthroughs in magical theory, developing new spells, achieving things that other wizards could only dream about. By every objective measure, you were succeeding, excelling, becoming one of the great magical minds of your generation. But late at night, in those rare moments when you paused your studies and let yourself feel something other than hunger for knowledge, you sometimes wondered if your master had been right. You'd look at your reflection in a mirror and see a stranger looking back. Your eyes had changed, taking on an otherworldly quality that made mortals uncomfortable. Your skin had paled from lack of sunlight, taking on an unhealthy cast. You'd lost weight, lost color, lost something essential that you couldn't quite name. When you tried to remember what you looked like before magic changed you, the image wouldn't quite come into focus. That person felt like someone else, someone you used to know, but had grown distant from over the years. The isolation deepened. You told yourself it was necessary for your research, that groundbreaking magical discoveries required solitude and focus. And this was partially true. The greatest breakthroughs in magical theory had always come from wizards working alone, free from distraction and outside interference. But the deeper truth, the one you didn't want to acknowledge, was that you couldn't connect with normal people anymore. The gulf between your experience and theirs had grown too wide. They couldn't understand you, and you couldn't relate to them. You were becoming something other, something apart, something alone. And still the hunger grew, insatiable and demanding, pushing you forward toward discoveries that would cost you more than you could imagine. Section 2. The Descent into Obsession. The fourth level of spells changed everything. This was where apprentices became true wizards, where the comfortable boundaries of what magic could do began to dissolve. You learned to create walls of fire, to turn your enemies to stone, to banish creatures back to their home planes. You learned Polymorph, that most dangerous of spells, able to reshape living flesh into beast forms you could imagine. The first time you successfully cast it, transforming a rat into a hawk, you felt something fundamental shift inside you. You weren't just bending the rules of nature anymore. You were rewriting them entirely. But the fourth level also marked the point where the physical toll became impossible to ignore. Your body no longer responded the way it once did. You'd notice yourself standing in your study, unaware that 6 hours had passed while you'd been reading, your legs numb from lack of movement, your bladder screaming for relief you hadn't noticed needing. Food lost its appeal entirely. You'd force yourself to eat because your body required fuel. but everything tasted like ash in your mouth. The subtle flavors and textures that once brought pleasure had become meaningless. Sometimes you'd forget to eat for 2 or 3 days straight, only remembering when you felt dizzy and weak, your body demanding sustenance you'd denied it. Sleep became your enemy. You resented the hours lost to unconsciousness when you could be studying, researching, experimenting. You developed spells and rituals to reduce your need for rest, potions that kept you alert for days at a time. When exhaustion finally forced you into bed, your dreams were no longer your own. You dreamed in mathematical formulae and arcane symbols, your sleeping mind continuing to work on magical problems while your body recuperated. Sometimes you'd wake up with solutions to theorems you'd been struggling with, as though your subconscious had access to knowledge your waking mind couldn't reach. This should have disturbed you, but instead you felt grateful. Even sleep was becoming productive. Your appearance continued its transformation. The changes that had been subtle before accelerated now. Your hair might have turned white or silver regardless of your age. Or perhaps it took on unnatural hues, streaks of blue or purple or colors that shifted depending on the light. Your fingertips developed calluses in strange patterns from the constant tracing of arcane gestures. Your eyes, already changed, began to see things that others couldn't, glimpses of the weave itself, the underlying magical structure that connected all things. This sight was both gift and curse. You could perceive magic in ways that enhanced your understanding and your casting, but you also couldn't unsee it. The world was forever overlaid with patterns and energies that distracted and overwhelmed you. The 5th level brought power that most wizards never achieved. You learned Cone of Cold, flash freezing your enemies where they stood, leaving them as frozen statues until they thawed. You learned Teleportation Circle, able to step across vast distances in an instant. You learned Dominate Person, reaching into another's mind and bending their will to yours completely. This last spell troubled you more than you'd expected. When you practiced it on a willing volunteer, feeling their consciousness surrender to your command through the telepathic link, watching them act according to your desires rather than their own, you felt a surge of power unlike anything you'd experienced. And you liked it. The realization that you enjoyed controlling another person's mind, that you found pleasure in removing their autonomy, horrified some small part of you that still remembered morality. But that part was growing smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. You told yourself the spell had legitimate uses. You could stop criminals, prevent violence, protect the innocent by controlling the wicked. But you knew these were rationalizations. The truth was simpler and darker. You liked having power over others. You liked knowing that with a few words and gestures, you could make anyone dance like a puppet on strings. You never used the spell casually. You told yourself. You had standards, ethics, boundaries you wouldn't cross. But those boundaries were movable, weren't they? Flexible, situational. And with each year that passed, they moved a little further until you barely recognized where your ethical lines had once been drawn. Your research took you into forbidden territories now. The standard magical texts no longer satisfied your hunger. You needed more obscure knowledge, more dangerous lore. You began seeking out grimoires that respectable wizards avoided, tomes written by those who delved too deep and paid terrible prices. These books had a feel to them, a wrongness that you could sense before even opening them. The pages were made from materials you didn't want to identify. The ink seemed to writhe under your gaze. The words themselves carried weight, as though reading them changed you in some fundamental way. And they did change you. Each forbidden text you studied left its mark. You'd spend days deciphering ancient languages that predated human civilization. Languages spoken by entities that existed before the gods themselves. The grammar didn't follow rational patterns. The syntax seemed designed to break the mind, trying to comprehend it. But you persisted, driven by that endless hunger, and eventually the meanings would reveal themselves. You'd learn spells that weren't meant for mortal minds, rituals that required components you couldn't acquire without committing acts you'd once have found unthinkable. The 6th level marked your full transformation into something no longer quite mortal. You learned disintegrate, able to reduce living creatures and objects to dust with a word, leaving nothing but ash behind. You learned true seeing, piercing all illusions and deceptions to perceive reality as it truly was. This spell, more than any other, drove home what you'd become. When you cast it and looked at the world with eyes unclouded by illusion, you saw horrors everywhere. You saw the true forms of creatures that walked among mortals in disguise. You saw the thin spots in reality where other planes pressed close. You saw the corruption and decay underlying everything that seemed solid and permanent. And worst of all, you saw yourself, your true self, what you'd become through years of magical study. The reflection was monstrous. You ended the spell quickly, returning to comfortable ignorance, but the image lingered in your memory. You couldn't unsee what you'd glimpsed. Your tower became your entire world. Days would pass without you stepping outside. Weeks, months. The seasons changed beyond your walls, but you barely noticed. Your library grew ever larger, shelf after shelf of acquired knowledge. Books on evocation sat beside treatises on necromancy. Scrolls describing the layers of the 9 hells were rolled beside maps of the far realm. You'd acquired this knowledge through various means, some legitimate, some less so. You traded favors with other wizards, purchased texts from morally questionable dealers, and occasionally stolen what you needed when no other option presented itself. You justified these actions as necessary for your research, for the advancement of magical understanding. The ends justified the means. Knowledge belonged to those willing to pursue it, regardless of cost. But the cost was mounting in ways you couldn't ignore forever. Your health, never robust after years of neglect, deteriorated further. You developed chronic headaches from the strain of containing so many spells in your mind. Your hands trembled when you weren't actively casting. Your heart developed an irregular beat, skipping and stuttering in your chest. You told yourself these were minor inconveniences, acceptable prices for the power you wielded. But late at night, when pain kept you awake despite exhaustion, you wondered if you were dying. Not dramatically, not from some magical backlash or experimental spell gone wrong, but slowly, gradually, your body giving out under years of abuse and neglect. The 7th level brought you to the threshold of true power. You learned Finger of Death, able to snuff out life with a gesture. You learned Teleport, able to transport yourself instantly across continents. You learned Simulacrum, creating perfect duplicates of yourself or others from snow and ice. This last spell fascinated and disturbed you. The duplicate looked exactly like the original, possessed their memories and personality, but based on the spell's nature. You couldn't help but wonder if something essential was missing. When you created a simulacrum of yourself and conversed with it, you felt a creeping horror. It spoke with your voice, moved with your mannerisms, knew everything you knew. But something about its eyes held an emptiness that chilled you. This could imply that what makes a being truly alive goes beyond mere memories and appearance. Your relationships with other wizards grew complicated and dangerous. You'd established a network of contacts, fellow practitioners of the art with whom you could trade information and resources. Some of these relationships bordered on friendship, or at least what passed for friendship among those who'd sacrificed their humanity for power. But trust was impossible. Every wizard you knew was pursuing their own agenda, seeking their own advantage, willing to betray anyone if it advanced their research. You'd been betrayed more than once, had your discoveries stolen, your experiments sabotaged, your reputation attacked. And you'd done the same to others when opportunity presented itself. This was simply how wizards operated. You couldn't expect loyalty or honesty from people who devoted their lives to bending reality itself. Deception and manipulation were simply more tools in your arsenal, no different from your spells. You began experimenting with magic that most wizards considered too dangerous to attempt. You summoned creatures from other planes, binding them to your service, interrogating them about the nature of their realities. Devils offered you bargains, promising knowledge in exchange for services you knew you shouldn't agree to, but found yourself considering anyway. Demons howled and threatened, their chaotic nature barely contained by your binding circles. Celestials pleaded with you to stop your research, warning that you were approaching boundaries that should never be crossed. You dismissed their concerns as naive morality, the whining of beings who'd never had to struggle for power. What did they know of the hunger that drove you, the need that consumed you? The 8th level elevated you to rarefied heights that few wizards ever reached. You learned mind blank, able to shield your thoughts from all divination and mental intrusion. You learned clone, creating backup bodies in case your current form was destroyed. You learned demiplane, able to create your own pocket dimension, a reality shaped entirely according to your will. This last spell should have satisfied something in you, the ability to create your own world, but it only fed the hunger. If you could create a small pocket reality, why not a larger one? Why not an entire plane? Why not remake all of existence according to your vision? Your physical form was deteriorating rapidly now. The signs were impossible to miss. Your skin had become thin as parchment, almost translucent, showing the network of veins beneath. Your bones stood out prominently, your body having consumed most of its fat and muscle tissue. You looked skeletal, corpse-like, barely alive. When you caught glimpses of yourself in mirrors or reflective surfaces, you sometimes didn't recognize the creature staring back. This couldn't be you. You'd been young once, hadn't you? Healthy. You tried to remember what you'd looked like before magic consumed you, but the memories wouldn't form clearly. That person felt like someone else entirely, someone you'd heard about, but never actually been. Food had become purely theoretical. You'd gone weeks without eating, sustaining yourself entirely on magic, on spells that kept your body functioning despite its neglect. You knew this wasn't sustainable. You knew you were damaging yourself irreparably. But stopping seemed impossible. Every moment spent on mundane physical maintenance was a moment not spent on magical research. You'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to waste time on something as trivial as eating or sleeping or maintaining basic health. Your mind was changing as profoundly as your body. The way you thought had become increasingly alien, even to yourself. You'd begun to perceive time differently, as something fluid and mutable, rather than a fixed linear progression. Past, present, and future sometimes seem to exist simultaneously in your awareness. You'd have conversations with people who hadn't arrived yet, or continue arguments that had ended hours ago, unable to keep track of which moment was now. Your sense of identity fractured. Were you the person who'd started this journey decades ago? Were you the wizard you were now? Were you the thing you'd become in the future? The fate that seemed increasingly inevitable? All these versions of yourself existed simultaneously in your mind, talking over each other, competing for dominance. The ninth level represented the pinnacle of mortal magical achievement. You learned Wish, the most powerful spell available to mortal wizards, able to reshape reality with a single utterance. You learned Time Stop, able to freeze the universe around you while you continued to act. You learned Power Word Kill, able to end life with a single word spoken with absolute certainty and will. These spells required no components beyond your voice, nothing but your mind, and an unshakable belief in your right to command reality itself. When you first successfully cast Wish, bending the universe to your desire through pure force of will, you felt briefly like a god. And that feeling was the most dangerous thing you'd ever experienced. Because gods were what came next, weren't they? You'd reached the limits of mortal magic, mastered every level, learned spells that most wizards could only dream of. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The hunger that had driven you this far demanded more. Always more. There were secrets beyond the ninth level, power beyond what mortals were meant to wield. You knew this because you'd read about wizards who'd gone further, who transcended mortal limitations entirely. Karsus had tried to steal godhood itself. Others had achieved lichdom, sacrificing their humanity for immortality and unlimited time to study. Still others had made bargains with entities from beyond reality, transforming themselves into something neither mortal nor divine, but somewhere in between. You stood at a crossroads now, though you barely recognized it as such. You could stop here, content with being one of the most powerful mortal wizards alive. You could step back from the brink, try to recover some semblance of the humanity you'd sacrificed. You could even try to use your power for good, protecting others, advancing civilization, leaving the world better than you'd found it. Some wizards made that choice. A rare few found something worth living for beyond the endless accumulation of power. They built schools, trained apprentices with more care than their own masters had shown, devoted themselves to constructive research rather than the pursuit of ever greater power. But you wouldn't make that choice, would you? You'd come too far, sacrificed too much, become too changed. The hunger that had driven you from the beginning hadn't been satisfied by achieving the ninth level. If anything, it had grown stronger, more demanding, more impossible to ignore. You'd seen what lay beyond, and you couldn't turn away from it. Mortality had become a cage, your human form a limitation, rather than the gift it should have been. You wanted more. You needed more. And you were willing to pay any price to get it. Your library had become a temple to forbidden knowledge. The shelves groaned under the weight of texts that should have been destroyed. grimoires that contained spells no mortal should know, research notes from wizards who'd gone mad, or worse. You'd acquired treatises on lichdom, despite knowing that reading them would change you irrevocably. You'd obtained dangerous texts containing knowledge that corrupted everyone who studied it. You'd even managed to acquire fragments of ancient artifacts that contained magic from civilizations long fallen. Each of these texts carried warnings, curses, protections meant to prevent their misuse. You'd bypassed every protection, broken every ward, ignored every warning. Because you needed to know. The knowledge they contained was too precious to leave unread, regardless of the cost. You'd crossed lines you'd once sworn never to approach. Your research had required materials and components that could only be obtained through acts you'd once have called evil. You'd justified each transgression at the time. The greater good, the advancement of knowledge, the pursuit of power that could be used to help others. But these were lies you told yourself to make the choices bearable. The truth was simpler and more terrible. You did these things because you wanted to, because the magic required it, because you'd become something that no longer felt constrained by mortal morality. The person you'd been when you started this journey would have been horrified by what you'd become. But that person was long dead, consumed by the wizard who'd taken their place. Your dreams had become indistinguishable from reality. You'd walk through alien landscapes that might have been memories or visions or glimpses of other planes. You'd converse with entities that claimed to be gods or demons or something beyond categorization. They offered you bargains, promised you power, showed you visions of what you could become if you just took one more step down the path you were already on. When you woke, you couldn't be certain what had been dream and what had been real. The boundaries between states of consciousness had dissolved for you. Waking, sleeping, meditating, casting spells, they all blurred together into a continuous stream of existence that you navigated without clear transitions. And through it all, the hunger grew. Insatiable, demanding, consuming everything you were, and reshaping it into something that existed only to pursue more power, more knowledge, more magic. You'd become exactly what your master had warned you about, exactly what you'd sworn you'd never let yourself become. But by the time you understood what was happening, it was far too late to turn back. The transformation was complete. You were no longer the person who'd first walked into a wizard's tower, full of dreams and ambitions. You'd become something else entirely, something that wore your face and carried your memories, but lacked the essential humanity that had once defined you. The question now wasn't whether you'd continue down this path. That decision had been made long ago. Perhaps from the very first moment you felt magic respond to your will. The question was how far you'd go, what final form you'd take, what price you'd ultimately pay for the power you couldn't stop pursuing. And deep down, in the parts of yourself you'd buried and ignored, you already knew the answer. You'd go as far as necessary. You'd become whatever you needed to become. You'd pay any price, make any sacrifice, cross any line. Because the alternative, stopping here, remaining merely mortal, had become unthinkable. You'd rather be a monster with power than a human without it. That choice had been made long ago, and nothing remained but to see it through to its inevitable conclusion. Section 3. The Eternal Curse. The decision to pursue immortality didn't come as a sudden revelation. It crept up on you gradually, year by year, as you watched time erode everything around you while your hunger for knowledge remained constant and demanding. You'd lived longer than you should have already, your body sustained by magic long past its natural lifespan. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. You had centuries of research ahead of you, millennia of secrets to uncover, and your mortal form was failing. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Either you found a way to transcend death, or everything you'd worked for would end when your body finally gave out. Lichdom presented itself as the obvious solution. You'd studied the process extensively, read every text you could find about the transformation, examined the remains of destroyed liches to understand their construction. The ritual was well documented, if difficult to perform. You needed rare components, some of which required acts you'd once have found unconscionable. You needed to prepare a phylactery, an object that would contain your soul and anchor it to the world after your body died. The process required casting specific spells. Enchant an item followed by trap the soul, causing the phylactery to glow with blue-green light when ready to receive a fragment of your soul. You needed to brew a poison so potent it would kill you with absolute certainty. Then drink it, while simultaneously casting the ritual that would bind your soul to the phylactery and reanimate your corpse as an undead creature of terrible power. Other wizards had walked this path before you. Larlock, the Shadow King, had achieved lichdom in ancient Netheril, believed to have been born around -628 Dale Reckoning. He became Sorcerer King of the Enclave of Jixadur, and after creating the powerful Death Moon Orb, he underwent the magical transformation into a lich. He still existed, one of the oldest non-draconic beings in Faerun, and one of the most powerful mages. Shaz-Tam ruled Thay as a lich of immense might, commanding armies of undead and living subjects alike. Vecna had transcended even lichdom to achieve something approaching godhood, though at a cost that made even other liches hesitate. These examples proved the viability of the transformation. They also demonstrated its price. Because the texts were quite clear, about what lichdom cost you. Your body would become a desiccated corpse, animated by magic, but fundamentally dead. You'd lose all physical pleasures, not that you'd experienced many of those in recent years anyway. Food, drink, warmth, touch, all the sensations that defined mortal existence would become meaningless to you. But more concerning was what happened to your mind, your soul, your essential self. The transformation to lichdom damaged something fundamental in the psyche. Liches retained much of their personality and emotions at first, but countless years of undeath caused memories to fade and the mind to twist. Eventually, a lich lost all shreds of its humanity. The state of existing as a lich was not pleasant, maintained only through sheer force of will. But over time, this willpower warped into an obsessive drive to become more and more powerful. Many soon appeared borderline insane in their hunger to acquire arcane secrets. Without great care, a lich's magic would slowly fail over time, and it would generally lose both its sanity and its body after around 900 years of lichdom. You told yourself you'd be different. You'd maintain your humanity through sheer force of will. You'd use your immortality for research and discovery rather than conquest and cruelty. You'd be one of the rare liches who transcended the usual patterns, who proved that undeath didn't have to mean the loss of everything that made you who you were. These thoughts comforted you as you gathered the components for the ritual. As you prepared your phylactery with meticulous care, as you brewed the poison that would end your mortal life. But you hesitated. Something in you, some last fragment of the person you'd been, recoiled from the final step. You'd prepared everything, performed all the preliminary rituals, stood ready to drink the poison and speak the words that would transform you into something undead. And you couldn't do it. Not yet. Not today. You told yourself you needed more preparation, more research, more certainty that you'd chosen the right path. But the deeper truth was fear. You were afraid of what you'd become, afraid that the transformation would destroy whatever remained of your humanity, afraid that you'd wake as a lich and find yourself a monster wearing your face. So you sought alternatives. The magical community whispered of other paths to immortality, methods that didn't require becoming undead. You could pursue the path of the Archmage, transcending mortality through pure magical power without technically dying. You could seek transformation into an outsider, becoming a creature of pure magic rather than flesh. You could make bargains with powerful entities, trading service for extended life. You could even pursue apotheosis, attempting to achieve actual godhood through ritual and worship. Each path had its advocates and its warnings, its successes and its failures. You investigated them all with obsessive thoroughness. The path of the Archmage required achieving magical power so great that mortality simply stopped applying to you. Wizards like Elminster had walked this path, becoming beings of such immense power that time and death couldn't touch them. Elminster was a chosen of Mystra, which granted him immortality and immunity to natural death. Through his unending life, he'd lived to be roughly over 1,000 years old. But this required not just skill, but divine favor. Circumstances that seemed both distant and potentially impossible for you to replicate. The weave itself, or rather its goddess, had to recognize you as something beyond mortal, granting you her blessing. Transformation into an outsider meant fundamentally changing your nature, becoming a creature of another plane. Some wizards had achieved this by binding themselves to elemental forces, becoming genies or elemental princes. Others had made bargains with entities from the outer planes, transforming into devils or demons or something stranger. These transformations offered immortality and power, but at the cost of your essential humanity. Based on what we know about planar entities, you'd become something alien, your thoughts and motivations reshaping themselves to match your new form. A wizard who became a devil would find themselves thinking like a devil, valuing what devils valued, pursuing goals that served the 9 hells rather than their original intentions. The divine path fascinated and terrified you. Achieving godhood was the ultimate transcendence, becoming something beyond mortal and immortal alike. The process required worship, belief, the faith of others channeled into your being. You'd need at least 200 followers who believed in you so strongly that their faith would literally reshape reality around you, granting you demigod status at minimum. Through worship, you could create a divine mantle, the spiritual aspect required to undergo apotheosis. And even if you achieved this, even if you ascended to godhood, you'd be bound by the needs and beliefs of your worshippers. Gods were powerful, but constrained, shaped by the domains they represented and the faithful who sustained them. Was this really freedom, or simply trading one cage for another? While you researched and debated and hesitated, time continued its relentless march. Decades passed in what felt like moments. You'd look up from your studies to realize that 10 years had gone by, then 20, then 50. The world outside your tower changed in ways you barely noticed. Kingdoms rose and fell. Wars were fought and ended. People you'd once known grew old and died. Their children grew old and died. Their grandchildren reached the age you'd been when you started your magical studies, lived their lives, and passed into history. And you remained suspended in time, neither fully alive nor yet undead, trapped in a liminal space between mortality and transcendence. Your body continued its decay despite your magic. You looked ancient now, far older than your actual years. Your skin had become like old leather. Your hair had fallen out in patches. Your eyes had sunken deep into their sockets. You moved with difficulty, your joints stiff and painful, your muscles wasted away to nothing. You sustained yourself entirely through magic now. Spells that kept your heart beating and your lungs breathing despite your body's desperate attempt to die. You were a corpse animated by will alone, stubbornly refusing to accept the death that should have claimed you years ago. Other wizards who knew you grew concerned. Some offered help, magical treatments that might restore some vitality to your failing form. Others suggested, gently at first and then more insistently, that you should complete the transformation to lichdom, or find another path to immortality before your body failed entirely. A few brave souls suggested the unthinkable, that you should accept your mortality, put your affairs in order, and allow yourself to die with whatever dignity remained to you. You ignored them all. The very suggestion that you should simply give up, should surrender to death after everything you'd sacrificed, filled you with rage. You'd come too far to quit now. But your research into immortality had revealed a troubling truth. Every path required sacrifice. Every method of transcending death demanded that you give up something essential, something that made you human. Lichdom required giving up your living body, and gradually over centuries, your capacity for anything but cruelty and obsession. Transformation into an outsider meant giving up your humanity entirely, becoming something alien. Apotheosis required giving up your freedom, becoming bound to domains and worshippers. And the path of the Archmage required divine favor you didn't possess and circumstances you couldn't create. There was no perfect solution, no method of achieving immortality without cost. You began to understand what your old master had tried to tell you all those years ago. The price of magic wasn't paid in coin or components. It was paid in everything that made life worth living. Every spell you learned distanced you from humanity. Every hour spent in study was an hour not spent connecting with others. Every boundary you crossed made it easier to cross the next one. And now you'd reached the ultimate boundary, the choice between accepting death or becoming something that could never truly be called alive. Some nights, in the darkest hours, when even your obsessive studying couldn't distract you, you wondered if you'd made a terrible mistake. If you could go back to that moment when you first felt magic respond to your will, would you make the same choice? If you could speak to your younger self, full of dreams and ambitions, what would you say? Would you warn them away from this path? Would you explain the price they'd pay for power? Or would your younger self ignore the warnings, convinced that they'd be different, that they'd somehow avoid the fate that had claimed you? The question was academic. You couldn't go back. Time moved in only one direction, and you'd spent yours becoming something you barely recognized. person you'd been at the beginning of this journey was dead, killed slowly by years of magical study, replaced by the thing you'd become. And now that thing stood at a crossroads, forced to choose between final death and a transformation that would complete the process of losing your humanity. You finally understood that there was no good choice. Lichdom would make you a monster. Remaining mortal would mean everything you'd worked for would die with you. Other paths to immortality were either impossible or would transform you just as thoroughly. You were trapped by the consequences of choices you'd made decades ago, when you'd been too young and arrogant to understand what you were choosing. The isolation had become absolute. You hadn't spoken to another living being in months, perhaps years. Time had become difficult to track. Your tower existed in a bubble of timelessness, days blurring together without distinction. You'd created this isolation deliberately, driving away anyone who tried to reach you, severing every connection to the world beyond your studies. But now the loneliness pressed down on you like a physical weight. You were surrounded by knowledge, drowning in books and scrolls and grimoires, but you had no one to share it with, no one who could understand what you discovered, no one who cared whether you lived or died. And the cruelest realization was this: even if you achieved immortality, even if you found a way to transcend death and continue your research forever, the loneliness would only deepen. Immortals existed apart from the mortal world by necessity. Forming connections with mortals was pointless when they'd age and die, while you remained unchanged. Other immortals were rare and often hostile, competing for resources and knowledge rather than offering companionship. You'd be alone, truly and completely alone, for centuries or millennia, or perhaps forever. The price of eternal life was eternal isolation. Your phylactery sat on your workbench, completed but not yet activated. You'd crafted it with exquisite care, a small obsidian box engraved with intricate runes. It would serve its purpose perfectly, containing your soul and anchoring it to the world after your death. You'd prepared backup phylacteries as well, hidden in various locations, insurance against destruction. You'd brewed the poison multiple times, perfecting the formula. You'd rehearsed the ritual until you could perform it flawlessly. Everything was ready. All that remained was the final choice, the step you couldn't bring yourself to take. Days turned to weeks, turned to months, as you stared at the phylactery and wrestled with your decision. Your body continued to fail. You could barely walk now, could barely hold a pen to write. Your vision blurred and darkened. Your hearing faded. You were dying finally and inevitably, and you had to choose. Die permanently, allowing everything you'd worked for to end with you, or drink the poison, speak the words, and wake as something undead, something powerful, something that would have centuries or millennia to continue the research you'd devoted your life to. The hunger made the choice for you. That endless, insatiable hunger for knowledge and power that had driven you from the beginning. It wouldn't let you simply die. It demanded you continue, regardless of cost. You'd sacrificed everything else for magic. Why should your humanity be any different? It was just one more price to pay, one more boundary to cross, one more step on the path you'd been walking all along. You drank the poison. The taste was bitter beyond description, burning your throat as it went down. You felt your body convulse, felt your heart stutter and stop, felt your lungs cease their desperate gasping. Death came quickly, overwhelming, absolute. And in that moment of transition, as your mortal life ended and the ritual took hold, you felt something fundamental break inside you. Something precious and irreplaceable that had survived everything else you'd endured. It shattered like glass, and you knew with terrible certainty that you'd never get it back. You woke as a lich. Your body was dead, truly dead, animated only by the magic that bound your soul to the phylactery. You felt nothing physically. No hunger, no thirst, no pain, no pleasure. Just a vast emptiness where those sensations used to be. But mentally, you felt more powerful than ever. The limitations of your failing mortal body were gone. You could study for years without rest. You could cast spells without the physical strain that used to exhaust you. You had all the time in the world to pursue your research, to uncover every secret, to achieve everything you'd dreamed of. The first century passed in a blur of research and discovery. You made breakthroughs in magical theory that would have been impossible during your mortal life. You developed new spells, refined existing ones, pushed the boundaries of what magic could accomplish. You were productive, brilliant, achieving things that mortal wizards could only dream about. And slowly, gradually, you began to change in ways you hadn't anticipated. The world seemed distant now, unreal, as though you were watching it through thick glass. Mortal concerns became increasingly trivial and incomprehensible. Why did they care about such fleeting things? Why did they waste their brief lives on emotions and relationships and experiences that would end so quickly? You thought you understood mortals, having been one yourself, but your memories of mortality grew hazy and abstract. You could remember the facts of your mortal life, but not the feelings, not the texture of experience that made those memories meaningful. Your research took darker turns. You'd always been willing to cross ethical boundaries in pursuit of knowledge. But now, those boundaries dissolved entirely, creating undead servitors to maintain your tower-required corpses, which you acquired without much concern for where they came from. Certain experiments required living subjects, and you performed those experiments without hesitation or remorse. the suffering you caused barely registered as real. Mortals were temporary creatures anyway, existing for an eye blink before fading into nothing. What did their brief pain matter compared to the eternal knowledge you could gain? You'd become exactly what the texts warned about, exactly what you'd sworn you'd never become. A monster in the shape of a wizard, driven by hunger and curiosity, with no remaining capacity for empathy or compassion. The person you'd been would have been horrified by what you'd become. But that person was long dead, killed first by decades of magical obsession, and finally by the poison that had transformed you into something undead. What remained wore your face and carried your memories, but lacked anything that could be called a soul in any meaningful sense. The 2nd century brought new horrors. You began to forget important things, not magical knowledge that remained sharp and clear, but personal memories, the experiences that had made you who you were. You tried to remember your family, but their faces wouldn't come into focus. You tried to remember why you'd wanted to become a wizard in the first place, but the motivations seemed alien and incomprehensible. You were losing yourself piece by piece, your identity eroding away, until only the hunger remained. Other liches you encountered were even worse. Some had existed for millennia, their humanity so completely eroded that they barely resembled the people they'd been. They were beings of pure malice and hunger, interested only in accumulating power and inflicting suffering. You saw your future in their empty eyes, understood that this was what awaited you. Given enough time, you'd become just like them. The transformation to lichdom hadn't made you immortal. It had simply delayed your death, replacing the quick end of mortal mortality with a slow dissolution of everything that made you who you were. And still you continued. Still you studied and experimented and pursued knowledge with the same desperate hunger that had driven you from the beginning. Because stopping was impossible. The hunger wouldn't allow it. You'd become a creature that existed only to consume knowledge, to accumulate power, to continue the endless pursuit that had already cost you everything. You were trapped in a cycle of your own making, unable to stop, unable to die, unable to do anything but continue the research that had already destroyed you. The loneliness was absolute now. You existed in a void of your own creation, surrounded by undead servitors and the ghosts of choices you'd made centuries ago. The world continued without you, mortals living and dying in patterns you no longer understood or cared about. And you remained eternal and empty, a cautionary tale that no one would ever hear because you'd outlived everyone who might have told it. This was the truth of immortality. Not eternal life, but eternal death. Consciousness persisting long past the point where anything meaningful remained. You'd achieved what you set out to achieve, transcended mortality and gained unlimited time to pursue magical knowledge. And it had cost you everything: your body, your humanity, your capacity for joy or love, or anything that made existence worthwhile. You'd become powerful beyond mortal comprehension and emptier than the void between stars. And the worst part, the truly horrifying realization that came to you in moments of terrible clarity, was that you'd make the same choices again. If you could somehow go back to the beginning, knowing everything you knew now, you'd still drink that first taste of power, still pursue magic with obsessive devotion, still sacrifice everything else for knowledge, still transform yourself into the hollow thing you'd become. Because the hunger was stronger than wisdom, stronger than fear, stronger than any desire for a different fate. The hunger was all that remained of who you'd been, and it would never be satisfied, never be appeased, never allow you rest. Section 4. Beyond Mortal Understanding. The centuries stretched before you like an endless desert, each year indistinguishable from the last. Your tower had become a monument to your transformation, its halls filled with the accumulated knowledge of ages. But knowledge alone couldn't fill the void inside you. The hunger that had driven you to lichdom hadn't been satisfied by immortality. If anything, it had intensified, demanding ever more dangerous pursuits, ever more forbidden research. The 9th level of spells, once the pinnacle of your ambitions, now seemed quaint and limited. You needed more. You needed to peer beyond the veil of reality itself, to understand the fundamental architecture of existence. Your research led you into territories that even other liches avoided. You began studying the spaces between planes, the thin places where reality grew weak and other dimensions pressed close. The far realm called to you from beyond comprehension, that terrible place where geometry didn't function according to rational rules, where entities existed that predated the gods themselves. The far realm was feared for its power to twist unfortunate visitors into gruesome monsters. And it was from here that aberrations came. Most wizards who touched the far realm went mad instantly, their minds unable to process the contradictions and impossibilities they perceived. But you were no longer quite sane anyway. Your mind had been reshaped by centuries of undeath, until madness and clarity became indistinguishable. You learned to pierce the barriers between worlds, to perceive multiple planes simultaneously. Standing in your tower on the material plane, you could see through to the Shadowfell's dark reflection, the Feywild's vibrant chaos, the ordered geometry of Mechanus, the burning depths of the 9 hells. The Shadowfell and Feywild were considered parallel planes, or echo planes of the material plane, coexisting with it. At thin places, the veil between these planes naturally weakened, creating junctures where one could glimpse or even cross between worlds. These visions overlaid each other in your perception, creating a kaleidoscope of realities that would have destroyed a mortal mind. But you'd long since transcended mortality. You processed these impossible sights with academic interest, cataloging the differences between planes, mapping the connections that bound them together. The entities you encountered in these explorations defied description. Some were demons and devils you could at least comprehend, creatures of evil bound to their respective planes. But others were things without names, without clear form or purpose, existing in ways that violated every principle of natural philosophy. They noticed you peering into their realms, and they noticed you back. Some ignored you as beneath their concern. Others found you fascinating, this undead thing that dared to study them. And a few made offers. The first bargain came from a creature that claimed no allegiance to any known plane or pantheon. It appeared in your sanctum uninvited, manifesting as a presence you felt rather than saw, a weight in reality that shouldn't have been possible. It spoke without voice, its meaning appearing directly in your mind, bypassing language entirely. It offered you knowledge, true understanding of the cosmic machinery that underlay all existence. The price was steep, but not unexpected. You'd need to perform services for this entity, acts that would reshape reality in ways that served its incomprehensible purposes. You'd become its agent in the mortal world, its hands performing work it couldn't do directly. You accepted. What choice did you have? The hunger demanded it. And what did morality matter anymore? You'd already committed countless acts that would have horrified your younger self. A few more wouldn't make any difference. The entity fulfilled its part of the bargain immediately. Knowledge flooded into your mind, truths about the nature of existence that no mortal wizard had ever comprehended. You learned how the planes connected to each other, how the weave functioned at its deepest levels, how reality itself could be manipulated in ways that went far beyond simple spellcasting. But the knowledge came with a price beyond the obvious one. Understanding changed you further. You began to perceive reality as a construct, a set of rules that could be rewritten by those with sufficient knowledge and will. The solidity of the world became transparent to you. Walls were just organized particles held together by forces you could now see and manipulate. Living creatures were complex patterns of energy and matter, no more real or permanent than the spell effects you created. Even time revealed itself as just another dimension, no more fixed than the spatial ones, potentially as mutable as everything else. This new perception was liberating and horrifying in equal measure. You were seeing the truth of existence, the fundamental reality beneath the comfortable illusions that mortals accepted as absolute. But this truth was cold and terrible. Nothing had inherent meaning or value. Everything was just patterns, just energy organized in temporary configurations before inevitably dissolving back into chaos. The universe was empty of purpose, empty of justice, empty of anything but blind mechanical processes operating according to rules that cared nothing for the suffering or joy they produced. You performed the services your bargain required, though you barely understood their purpose. You'd travel to specific locations and speak words of power that reshaped reality in subtle ways. You'd manipulate events to ensure certain outcomes, nudging history along paths that served your patron's unknowable agenda. Sometimes you'd glimpse the larger pattern, see how your actions connected to some vast design, but mostly you operated in ignorance, trusting that the entity knew what it was doing even if you didn't. Other entities noticed your willingness to bargain and made their own offers. A Duke of the Nine Hells promised power over souls in exchange for gathering them for the blood war. A demon lord offered mastery over chaos magic if you'd spread corruption in certain cities. A being from the far realm, something that barely qualified as intelligent in any recognizable sense, showed you visions of alternate realities in exchange for allowing it to observe the material plane through your senses. You accepted them all, or most of them, trading pieces of your autonomy for knowledge and power that kept feeding the endless hunger. Your tower became a nexus point, a place where multiple planes intersected. Creatures from across the multiverse visited you, some as allies, some as supplicants seeking your aid, some as rivals testing your defenses. You'd host gatherings where devils argued theology with demons, where celestials pleaded with you to reconsider your path, where things without names discussed mathematics that described impossible geometries. These meetings followed no schedule or pattern. Time operated differently in your tower now, flowing at rates that varied from moment to moment. Centuries might pass outside, while only days went by within your walls, or vice versa. The mortal world became increasingly distant and irrelevant. You'd occasionally emerge from your tower to find that kingdoms you'd known had fallen, that entire civilizations had risen and collapsed while you were distracted by research. The maps you'd memorized were obsolete, rendered meaningless by the passage of centuries. New nations occupied territories where forests had once stood. Deserts covered what had been fertile farmland. The very geography had changed, shaped by wars and magic and the relentless erosion of time. Mortals who encountered you fled in terror or attacked on sight, recognizing you as an abomination, an undead horror that shouldn't exist. You barely noticed their reactions. They were insects, mayflies, barely conscious creatures who lived and died in the blink of an eye. Their fear or hatred meant nothing to you. On rare occasions, ambitious young wizards would seek you out, hoping to learn from your vast knowledge. You'd accept a few as apprentices, teaching them the fundamentals of magic, watching them begin the same journey you'd taken centuries ago. Most didn't last. The rigors of apprenticeship to a lich broke them physically or mentally. Those who survived would eventually leave, either realizing what path they were on and fleeing while they still could, or embracing it fully and beginning their own descent into whatever transformation they chose. You never warned them. You never explained what they were choosing, just as your own master hadn't really warned you, couldn't warn you in ways you'd have understood or believed. The hunger for power made people deaf to warnings. You could describe every horror that awaited them, show them what you'd become, explain in excruciating detail the price they'd pay. They'd nod and thank you for the knowledge and proceed anyway. Convinced they'd be different, they'd avoid your mistakes. They'd somehow achieve power without paying the cost. They were already lost. The moment they sought you out, the moment they decided to pursue magic seriously, their fate was sealed. Your research eventually brought you to the ultimate question that had haunted wizards since the art was first discovered. What was the weave? Not how it functioned or how to manipulate it, but what it fundamentally was. Why did magic exist at all? Who or what had created the system that allowed mortal minds to reshape reality through will and word? The standard answer was that the goddess Mystra embodied the weave, that she maintained and regulated the flow of magic. But this answer just pushed the question back one level. Where did Mystra come from? What had existed before her? What would happen if she died or was destroyed? You learned that gods were not the eternal, unchanging beings that mortals believed. Mystra herself had died during the time of troubles, when she defied the will of Io the Overgod and attempted to leave the prime material plane. She was destroyed by Helm, and at the conclusion of the Gods' War, Io offered the position of goddess of magic to the wizard Midnight, who reluctantly accepted and took Mystra's name. Gods had been created, shaped from belief and worship, given form and power by the faith of their followers. Before the current pantheon, other gods had existed and passed into history when their worshippers forgot them or died. The gods themselves feared certain truths, certain beings that existed beyond their power to control or comprehend. And above or beyond the gods, there was Io, the overgod who claimed to be the creator of the gods, though not of the realms themselves. Io held complete sway within his domain, as was typical of overgods who presided over crystal spheres. Your patrons, those entities you'd bargained with over the centuries, occasionally hinted at even higher realities. They spoke in fragments and metaphors, unable or unwilling to explain directly. There were layers of existence. They suggested, realities stacked upon realities, each one containing what lay beneath it, like dreams within dreams. The material plane and its connected dimensions were just one layer. Above it were conceptual realms where ideas existed as places, where thought and reality were indistinguishable. And above those were dimensions that couldn't be described at all, where existence operated according to rules so alien that even glimpsing them would destroy anything from lower realities. The elder evils of the far realm existed as titanic entities that spanned hundreds of layers simultaneously. These colossal and unknown creatures were forces of corruption and evil in the multiverse. They were thought to be the creators of aberrations and would like nothing more than to pervert the multiverse and transform it into the far realm. The most powerful far realm entities were comparable to deities or primordials in their power. Some legends suggested they were older than the gods of Faerun, ancient echoes of forgotten forces that even the deities dared not challenge directly. Usually incapable of leaving the far realm, the elder evil's influence leaked out into the worlds of the material plane, often influencing the actions of power-hungry cultists. You tried to perceive these higher dimensions, to extend your consciousness beyond the limits of the reality you knew. The attempts nearly destroyed you. Your phylactery cracked under the strain, nearly shattering and releasing your soul to final death. Your mind fragmented into pieces that took decades to reassemble. Your perception of time became so distorted that you experienced centuries simultaneously, past and future, collapsing into an eternal present that drove you to the edge of total dissolution. But you persisted, driven by the hunger that wouldn't let you rest, wouldn't let you stop seeking, wouldn't allow you peace. And you succeeded, briefly, in perceiving something beyond normal reality. The vision lasted only moments, but changed you irrevocably. You saw existence as a vast computational process, reality as information being processed according to rules that were themselves subject to modification. You saw that free will was an illusion, that every choice you'd ever made had been predetermined by the initial conditions of the universe and the rules governing cause and effect. You saw your own future stretching out before you, an endless repetition of the same patterns, the same hunger, the same futile seeking. You saw your eventual destruction, though whether it came in centuries or millennia, you couldn't determine. Time had become too strange, too fluid for linear prediction. The vision should have destroyed your will to continue. What point was there in research when all outcomes were already determined? What meaning could knowledge have when it was just patterns of information following inevitable rules? But the vision also showed you something else. This could imply that the predetermined nature of existence didn't make choices meaningless. The illusion of free will was so perfect, so complete, that it functioned identically to actual freedom. You could act as though your choices mattered, and in every measurable way they would matter, even if some higher reality knew they were determined. The universe was a magnificent mechanism, beautiful in its complexity, sublime in its scope. Understanding it, even knowing you couldn't change it, was its own reward. Your research took on new urgency after this revelation. If everything was predetermined, then your current path was inevitable. You would continue seeking knowledge until the moment of your destruction arrived. But the seeking itself was the point. The hunger that drove you wasn't a flaw, but a feature, a necessary component of who and what you were. You'd been shaped by forces beyond your control to become exactly what you'd become. And you'd continue being that thing until those same forces determined your end. You began working on your magnum opus, a comprehensive treatise on the nature of magic and reality that would synthesize everything you'd learned over centuries of research. The work consumed you utterly, demanding every scrap of knowledge you'd accumulated, every insight you'd gained, every secret you'd uncovered. You wrote for decades without pause, filling volume after volume with dense magical notation and arcane formulae. The text wasn't meant for mortal comprehension. No living wizard could hope to understand more than fragments of what you were recording. But perhaps other liches would find value in it. Or perhaps some future civilization would decipher its meanings long after your inevitable destruction. The process of writing forced you to confront what you'd become with brutal clarity. You recorded not just your discoveries, but your transformation, documenting the step-by-step process by which a young apprentice with dreams and ambitions had become a hollow, undead thing, driven only by hunger. You examined each choice, each boundary crossed, each piece of humanity sacrificed. You tried to find the moment when you could have chosen differently, when you could have stepped off this path. But no such moment existed. Every choice had followed logically from what came before, each step inevitable given who you were and what you wanted. You'd been doomed from the moment magic first called to you, perhaps from before you were born, from the initial conditions of the universe setting in motion the chain of causality that led to your existence and transformation. Your final chapters dealt with the ultimate fate awaiting all wizards who pursued power to its logical conclusion. Some achieved lichdom and slowly dissolved over centuries, losing themselves piece by piece until only mindless hunger remained. Some made bargains with entities from beyond reality and were transformed into things that could no longer be called wizards or even beings, becoming extensions of their patron's will. Some attempted apotheosis and succeeded partially, becoming something between mortal and divine, but never quite achieving true godhood, trapped in a liminal state that satisfied neither aspect of their nature. Some simply went mad, their minds breaking under the weight of truths they weren't designed to comprehend. A very few transcended entirely, achieving transformations so complete that they left reality altogether. These wizards became myths and legends, their actual fates unknown, because they'd stepped beyond the boundaries of the multiverse into dimensions that couldn't be described or comprehended by those who remained. Were they happy? Did they finally satisfy the hunger? Or did they simply carry their obsessions and emptiness into new realms, continuing the endless seeking that had defined their existence? You'd never know. But based on what you understood about the nature of the hunger, you suspected the latter. The hunger didn't go away with transformation. It was fundamental, essential, the core of what made a wizard a wizard. You completed your magnum opus after decades of work, creating 37 volumes of pure magical theory, each one capable of driving mortals mad just from reading the table of contents. You placed them in your library, warded them with every protection you could devise, and felt a strange emptiness when the work was done. For decades, the writing had given you purpose beyond the endless accumulation of knowledge. Now that purpose was gone, and you were left with the same hunger, the same seeking, the same hollow existence you'd endured for centuries. The world continued changing without you. Empires rose and fell like waves on a shore. Heroes achieved great deeds and passed into legend. New wizards discovered fragments of your early work and built entire magical traditions around them, never knowing the source. Your name, if it was remembered at all, had become distorted beyond recognition, transformed into something mythical and abstract. You'd outlived your own legacy, watching it mutate and evolve until it bore no resemblance to the truth of who you'd been or what you'd done. And still you continued. Still you studied and experimented and sought knowledge with the same desperate hunger, because there was nothing else. You were the hunger now. Everything else that had once defined you had been stripped away, leaving only the endless need to know, to understand, to accumulate power and insight that would never bring satisfaction or peace. You were trapped in an eternal present, neither alive nor quite destroyed, continuing the patterns that had been set in motion when you first felt magic respond to your will. This was the dark truth of life as a wizard, the secret that couldn't be taught or explained to apprentices, because they wouldn't believe it until they'd experienced it themselves. Magic demanded everything, not just time and effort, not just sacrifice and dedication, but your essential humanity, your capacity for joy and connection, your very self. The power was real and the knowledge was genuine, but the price was absolute. You gave up everything that made existence worthwhile in exchange for abilities that left you empty and alone. pursuing goals that could never be achieved, feeding a hunger that could never be satisfied. And if some young apprentice came to you tomorrow, bright-eyed and ambitious, full of dreams about the spells they'd learn and the power they'd wield, what would you tell them? Would you warn them? Would you explain the truth of the path they were choosing? You already knew the answer. You'd teach them the fundamentals. Watch them take their first steps toward transformation, and say nothing about what awaited them. Because warnings were meaningless. The hunger was stronger than fear, stronger than wisdom, stronger than any desire to avoid the fate that had claimed you. They were already lost. The moment they decided to seriously pursue magic, their path was set. All that remained was to watch them walk it, step by inevitable step, becoming exactly what you'd become, repeating the pattern that had been repeated countless times before and would repeat countless times again. The cycle continued, eternal and inescapable. Apprentices became wizards. Wizards pursued power. Power demanded sacrifice. Sacrifice led to transformation. Transformation led to emptiness. And emptiness drove the search for more power. And somewhere in the infinite multiverse, in dimensions beyond counting, other beings watched this cycle with interest or indifference or emotions that had no names in mortal languages. The wizards were insects to them, mayflies pursuing mayfly concerns, important only in aggregate, as part of larger patterns and processes. Individual wizards didn't matter. What mattered was the system, the machinery of reality that processed mortal ambition into power, and power into emptiness, and emptiness into dust. You were that dust, a remnant of something that had once been alive, animated by forces you'd long since stopped trying to control. And you'd continue until those forces determined your destruction, however many centuries or millennia that required. The dark truth was that there was no escape, no redemption, no possibility of recovering what you'd lost. There was only the hunger, the seeking, the endless pursuit of knowledge that destroyed everything in its path. This was what you'd chosen, what had been chosen for you, what awaited anyone who seriously pursued the art. And given the chance, you'd choose it again, because the hunger was all you were, and without it, you'd be nothing at all. If you enjoyed diving deep into the dark corners of dungeons and dragons lore with me today, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me continue exploring the hidden truths and forgotten stories that make this world so endlessly fascinating. Until next time, may your own hunger for knowledge never consume you quite so completely.